Well, good morning, y'all. Uncle Frank here. I'm here today make a statement about our idiot president. And I know I've done this before, but, it's easy to keep talking about him because every time he opens his mouth, he gives you another example of his total lack of knowledge. For a college-educated, successful businessman, he obviously was asleep during his fucking history classes. So as a student of history, I'm going to help him out. Mr. President, I hope you watch this. I know you ain't. But you really need all the help you can get. So, during a recent interview, he made a couple of statements. One, he said he couldn't understand why the Civil War had to happen. Don't understand why it couldn't have been worked out. Two, he, of course, is a great admirer of the former president, Andrew Jackson. And he's like, well, Andrew Jackson didn't agree with anything that happened with the Civil War. And if he'd have been president, it would have been worked out. Okay. Well, first of all, Mr. President, Andrew Jackson died in 1845. He wasn't alive when the Civil War happened 16 years later. So he was not here to discuss the merits of anything about it. So I don't know where you got that shit at. Just like you thought Frederick Douglass was still alive. Second of all, he just amazes me. Second of all, let's talk about the Civil War. You couldn't understand why it couldn't be worked out. Well, here's why it couldn't be worked out. Comes down to one word: slavery. Slavery is wrong. It was wrong then. It was wrong before then. It's wrong now. And it's still in the world today. But let's talk about our little example. Slavery. The South was not going to get rid of slavery on its own in the near future. Everyone talks about, well, if they'd have just left it alone, the South would have faced. No, the South wouldn't have phased it out. What they would have done is simply moved from open slavery to what they worked out later on, which was making all of their African Americans into poor, indentured sharecroppers, still doing all the work for them with them getting all the money, and they'd still beat the hell out of them if they didn't do what they said. So, if the South had been left alone, maybe today we wouldn't have slavery, but it would have taken them 100 years or better. No. Unfortunately, any scenario you run comes down to a armed civil war, battles, blood, death to end slavery. So there was no working it out. The only thing that would have stopped the Civil War as far as negotiations is for the South to abolish slavery. That was never going to happen. Or for the North to say slavery is great and we're going to allow it to be anywhere in the country. That was never going to happen. So, Mr. President, you don't know what you're talking about. Every time you open your mouth, you prove that. Stupid son of a... Anyway, now let's talk about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a Southern white plantation owner. And I can tell you, if you owned a plantation in the South at that time of history, you had slaves. And Andrew Jackson had slaves. He may have treated them well. I really don't know his history on what type of slave owner he was. The great myth about slavery, many plantation owners treated their slaves like family. They didn't beat them. They didn't discipline them. They fed them well. They saw that they had excellent clothes. They allowed them to be educated. But they were still their slaves. Andrew Jackson was one of the great white supremacists of his time. If you look at his campaigns as a military and militia leader against the Native American tribes of the Southeast, he was brutal. He gave no quarter. He showed no mercy. And his actions, both as a military leader and as a political figure, basically led to the destruction of most of the Native American cultures east of the Mississippi River. They led directly to things like the Trail of Tears, and he didn't care. If you weren't white, you weren't right. As far as he was concerned, Creoles, blacks, those of Spanish descent, Native Americans, they were less than white Americans. That's just the way he was. It was the culture he was raised in, and it was the life he led. And he didn't care. The Cherokee as a tribe, were allies of the white man for 100 years. Highly cultured, highly civilized. They westernized. It didn't matter. Get your ass to Oklahoma, and if you don't move quick enough, I'll put a boot in your ass. So make no mistake about it, he was pro-slavery. He was pro-white. Now, he wasn't around. Sorry, Mr. President, he wasn't here. But let's run a hypothesis. Let's make Andrew Jackson alive in 1860. Let's not only make him alive, let's make him at the peak of his political power. And let's run him in the presidential election of 1860 against Abraham Lincoln. I think there's a pretty good chance he would have won. Possibly. But let's say he wins and he's the president in 1860. He takes office in 1861. He's inaugurated. Okay, yeah, you're right. There's a pretty good chance a civil war would not have happened at that time, simply because the primary reason the South seceded was the election of Abraham Lincoln. With a white Tennessee plantation owner as president, I doubt the South would have seceded at that time. But make no mistake about it, it would have happened. The only difference is the Civil War might have come 8 years later, when the technology and the weaponology was more advanced, which would simply have meant the casualty rates would have been much higher. Okay. So we've eliminated, make no mistake about it, Andrew Jackson would not have mediated to try and work things out. That wasn't the way he did things. Andrew Jackson was a very strong president. He believed in the power of the presidency and the supreme power of the federal government. Which is why, when the South, if they did, let's say in our little scenario, the South said, well, we don't really care who's president. We're tired of this shit. We're tired of listening to y'all gripe about our slaves. so we're seceding. And they fire on Fort Sumter. Well, make no mistake about it. The minute the South Carolina militia and the Confederate troops fired, first of all, it wouldn't even took that. When they succeeded, he would have marched in to South Carolina. That's just the kind of president he was. He would not have taken no shit from any state trying to go out on their own. The only difference with it would have been Andrew Jackson would not have appointed or put in charge these piss poor Yankee generals that run the war for the first year and damn near lost it for the North. He would have found a way to put guys like Grant, instead of Grant and Sheridan and Sherman being pushed to the sideline, he would have had them at the very beginning. And I think history would have been different as far as the actual fighting of the war. But that's neither here nor there. That's a scenario because he wasn't alive. Again, he died in 1845. So, matter of fact, I'm not for sure he was even alive during the Mexican-American War. So, I mean, he wasn't even around for that war. Maybe he could have mediated that, Mr. Trump. I don't know. You tell me. You're this great student of history. He admires Andrew Jackson, and there is much to be admired about Andrew Jackson. He wants to be a strong president like Andrew Jackson, but he's not. He's not a strong president. He is a megalomaniac idiot who is convinced he's strong. He wants to show people he's strong, which means he's prone to doing irrational things. That's scary. I'm going to leave you with that famous quote. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of history. That's who we have in the White House. And it's scary. I'm Uncle Frank. This is my view. This is the Redneck Truth. Y'all have a great day, and God bless.